You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. In Maryland, activists are calling on Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby to drop charges against a black man who was facing his 5th murder trial for the homicide of a security guard. In 2015, officers approached Keith Davis. They mistook him for a robbery suspect. The officers also believed his phone was a handgun. They demanded Davis drop the phone and begin shooting. He was shot more than 40 times. A jury acquitted Davis of the robbery accusation, but convicted him of possessing a gun. Critics of Davis's trial called the evidence unreliable and flimsy. At a news conference regarding a different incident, a reporter asked Baltimore City State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby about the Keith Davis case.
I'm not here on the Keith Davis trial. The one thing I can say about that matter is that I'm going to fight for victims of crime in the city of Baltimore. That is my job, that is my role, that is my responsibility, and my concern in that case is Kevin Jones.
Now, joining me right now is Kelly Davis, the wife of Keith Davis, and his attorney, Latoya Francis-Williams. Glad to have both of you on the show. I want to start with you, Latoya. So walk people through exactly how we got to this point. So he was holding a phone, but he was convicted of possessing a gun. Were fingerprints found? Did he have a gun? Was one planted? And how is this now a 5th trial?
Right. Well, the long and short of it should not be a 5th trial. Mr. Davis never held, never had, never possessed a gun. Mr. Davis was actually acquitted of what we call wear, carry, and transport. However, there was a handgun, the state's version, located in the mechanic's garage on top of a refrigerator. And so in the state of Maryland, one could be convicted of constructive possession, meaning possibly if the handgun is within your lunge, reach, and grasp, and there's an allegation that you could have known of it and exercised control, that is considered to be possession. So while the jury acquitted Mr. Davis of actually possessing and all the other counts in the robbery trial, that is the linchpin. That is what the state's attorney's office has hung their hat on.
All right, so at the initial trial, okay, so then there was a second one. When was that? And then when was the third one? And then when was the 4th one? And now, go ahead.
So here we are. I mean, to keep it brief, I should say, the robbery trial took place first. When Mr. Davis was acquitted of all the charges that one could think of, he was charged with robbery, assault first degree, wear, carry, transport, a host of charges alleging that he tried to rob what we call a hack in Baltimore, an unlawful taxi. The allegation was also that he attempted or did shoot at law enforcement. Despite the state's version of what happened, saying that that handgun was never fired, those charges hung out there until the first day of trial, and the one count of discharge of a firearm was dismissed by the state. So after he was acquitted of all those counts in the robbery trial, the state then brought the first murder trial. The murder charge was based on the allegation that the handgun that is alleged to have been recovered, that's still up for debate, because the only officers in that mechanic's garage were the shooting officers. And as we all know at this point, at least one of the shooting officers was under federal investigation for trafficking drugs from Philadelphia to Baltimore. So as we all know, the difficulty in Baltimore and the credibility of the Baltimore Police Department, the version of the officers is that one of them discovered a handgun on top of the refrigerator itself. The handgun is alleged to have been associated with the killing of Kevin Jones earlier that morning at the Pimlico racetrack. So that's supposed to be the tie-in. But nevertheless, as the trials have gone on, the state's own witnesses have testified in favor of Mr. Davis, identifying that that handgun has no evidence of gunshot residue, no evidence of being fired that day, that the shell casings that were tested according to the firearms examiner of Baltimore City, their own expert witness, identified that while he called the shell casing from the homicide scene to the handgun itself a match, he ended up admitting on cross-examination that he just simply eyeballed the shell casings. He actually took no notes. He did nothing according to protocol, and that is what the state is hanging their hat on. You know, it's unfortunate that it's so convoluted, but Mr. Davis has certainly been dragged through the dirt since 2015, and it's certainly been our position as both a criminal defense attorney and a plaintiff's attorney, civil rights attorney, that Mr. Davis has become the butt of this persecution because he survived the police-involved shooting. There's no question that what has been made available to the public is Mr. Davis was the first person shot in Baltimore City by police since Freddie Gray. And that has been the plight of Mr. Davis. He's been fighting since June of 2015 for his liberty and his life. So to kind of keep it brief, Mr. Davis was convicted of second-degree murder that was overturned. The other trials ended either in a hung jury or an overturned conviction. So we have 4 in total in terms of the homicide, and in terms of the robbery, as I just explained. It's been a whirlwind. And unfortunately, we are still where we are today because the state's attorney for Baltimore City refuses to put her eyes on the actual evidence. So, you know, we're here. We certainly appreciate you listening and the nation listening to the plight of Mr. Davis.
So has a 5th trial date been set?
A 5th trial date has been set. If I'm not mistaken, are we in May of 2022? Ms. Davis, I know, is on the line. I believe it's set for May of 2022. I could be standing corrected. She can correct me if I'm wrong on the exact date.
Kelly, what about that? Kelly, you're on mute. I think now we got you. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. May 16th, 2022 will be his next trial date.
So he was shot more than 40 times. How is his health? Is he still impacted by that many bullets?
Mr.
Yes,
Martin,
sir.
he was shot at.
He was shot at 40 times. Kelly, how many times was he hit?
He was hit 3 times, once in his arm, his back, and a bullet that went through his face and lodged into his neck.
How is he now?
He still suffers tremendously. He was a completely healthy 23-year-old when he went in, and now we've had to fight the corrections facility multiple times a year just to get him adequate medical attention. When the bullet went through his face, it severed his sinus cavity, so he now has issues breathing. He has just as much titanium on one side of his face as he does bone on the other, as well as he still has fragments in his neck and his ear and that are close to his spine that were unable to be removed.
How long has he been in? How much longer does he have to go?
He
Time-wise.
in prison.
Yeah, in terms of walk folks through what, because first of all, walk folks through his process. First of all, because you say we were fighting, you say we were fighting the corrections folks when it comes to his treatment. Explain that.
So, of course, when you're in prison, it's inadequate medical care. He's not getting what he's needed. We have to fight in order for him to get medicine, like prednisone, just to be able to breathe. We have to fight for him to be seen by a doctor. When you're in prison, your medical care and your well-being is the least of their worries. So that's what we've had to fight. And he's been incarcerated since they shot him. So they shot him on June 7th, 2015. He's been in their custody since. We've had to fight multiple times. He's had a bullet removed out of his neck in 2017. We had to fight to have that removed. He's had breathing issues. He just recently, this past year, I had to rally the public together to call into the correctional facility as I received a call saying that he was on a ventilator and I needed to sign for a procedure. He was on a ventilator. He had to have a blood transfusion. He was bleeding out and they didn't know where. And even still to this day, he still is not receiving the medical care that he needs for that incident as well.
I'm trying to understand here, Latoya. So his conviction was overturned in 2019, but he's still in prison?
That is correct. It sounds convoluted and crazy because it is. As we stand here today, Mr. Davis has served the entirety of any sentence that he should and could have served. And we're dating back to the robbery trial, the constructive possession conviction. He has served that sentence. He is literally sitting pre-trial at this point. His new criminal defense team has lobbied for bail reconsideration, habeas petitions on behalf of Mr. Davis, not just for his medical conditions, but he's innocent until and unless proven guilty. But this man is actually an innocent man. The state's attorney's office has been able to lodge charges against him and use the allegations themselves as the reason to hold him pre-trial. Now, the very frustrating portion is this. I ask anyone that has followed any of the trials to look at the testimony from the state's attorney's office's witnesses. Every allegation against Mr. Davis is refuted by their own witnesses. Location. There's an allegation that Mr. Davis was at Pimlico Racetrack and shot Kevin Jones. That's the allegation. The state's own expert witness said, actually, we can't place Mr. Davis at Pimlico Racetrack. Handgun. The state's allegation is that Mr. Davis had wielded, carried, touched, shot this handgun. Hammerly pistol. Their own firearms examiner expert said that there's no evidence that this handgun was actually fired on this day in question, that there's no evidence that there's any gunshot residue. And the biggest and most important concession by the state's witness is that there was actually never an assessment done with the shell casings from the Pimlico Racetrack to this gun that's alleged to have been found on the top of a refrigerator in the mechanic's garage that Mr. Davis took cover in when the police started shooting. Everything from DNA to fingerprints, the state's own witness testified that there is no evidence of Keith Davis on Kevin Jones, and there's no evidence, DNA evidence, of Kevin Jones on Keith Davis. If we were to go through bit by bit the allegations against Keith Davis and simply take the sworn testimony from their witnesses throughout these many trials, you will find that every one of the allegations has been shot down by the state's attorney's office. So where do we find ourselves? We're wondering what next. If your own witnesses have refuted your rendition of what happened on June 7 of 2015, the only result right now should be to drop the charges.
So, Kelly, after his conviction was overturned, he was then charged by prosecutors with stabbing an inmate?
Yes, sir. Keith, his conviction was overturned. There was an incident that had took involving his case, and myself and my family thought we could breathe a little bit easier because this conviction was overturned, and we left town to go celebrate Memorial Day. And as soon as we got to the hotel, we got a call from his lawyer saying that he was being charged for a fight that happened inside of the prison that was a year old. So it was a case, an incident that happened with him, and the prosecutor's office reviewed that information and decided at that time, the incident, that it was nothing, that it was just an incident that happened in there. And then a year later, Marilyn Mosby and a new prosecutor, Marilyn Mosby's office, has now filed charges for that year-old fight. So
that means, Latoya, he's facing a retrial on an event in 2015,
Correct.
but could be facing a second trial over this attempted murder in prison.
And let's be very clear, you are correct in that analysis. The state has decided now, more than a year after the alleged fight took place, and I've got to tread lightly in terms of talking about that. We do believe that there's video evidence that, again, exonerates Mr. Davis. What's troubling is this. The state's attorney's office has made clear the only reason they brought these, quote, attempted murder charges now against Mr. Davis was to ensure that he stays in jail pre-trial. They were nervous that the court would assess the weight of the state's case in the murder trial and let him go home pre-trial. So this was their way to really anchor him down. If this is not malicious prosecution, I don't know what it is. What we do know at this point is that an assistant state's attorney, back when Mr. Davis was attacked last year, analyzed the information last year and decided that it was not worthy of bringing criminal charges against Mr. Davis for whatever reason. Either they didn't believe he was an instigator, either they believed that the evidence didn't support any charges, much less an attempted murder charge. The local reporting at this point on that second case was that there, in fact, was no knife found. And it's my understanding at this point is witnesses have been contacted, and those witnesses find this charge against Mr. Davis laughable, quote unquote, laughable. So again, you know, we implore the state's attorney for Baltimore City to do the right thing, not continue this persecution against Mr. Davis, and saddling him with other charges won't wrong these rights. Won't right these wrongs, I should say, excuse me. It doesn't, as we said before, it doesn't change the facts of June of 2015, that Mr. Davis is in fact a victim, not just of government overreach, but Mr. Davis is a victim of police misconduct, and Mr. Davis is a victim of prosecutorial misconduct.
Okay, it's a whole lot to unpack there. And we certainly thank both of you, Latoya as well as Kelly, for providing us this perspective. And we've reached out to the office of Marilyn Mosby to get a comment, and we hope to get one beyond that comment that we played just on the show. We appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Racial injustice is a scourge on this nation, and the Black community has felt it for generations. We have an obligation to do something about it. Whether it's canceling student debt, increasing the minimum wage, or investing in Black-owned businesses, the Black community deserves so much better. I'm Nina Turner, and I'm running for Congress to do something about it.